Welcome to this episode of Gain Meets, where Gain trustee Rahul Mudgal is joined by Georgina Witter, UK Institutional and Intermediary Sales Associate at Brown Advisory.
Welcome, Georgina. Really would love to get to know you today, understand your role, and really try and help our young women understand what you do, how you got into this industry, and the career advice you can give them in terms of building their careers in finance. So why don't we start off with sort of getting a whistle-stop tour of your background, your career today, and how you sort of landed your current role?
Of course. Thank you, Rahul. And it's a pleasure to be on this podcast today. The whistle stop tour, obviously, I'm new into my career, so it's not as extensive as yours. But I had the pleasure of being sort of linked with Gain in their summer internship program while I just left university. So I went to Edinburgh University and studied geography. And sort of caveat that with I landed in finance, which isn't necessarily always the natural sort of link as you think, oh, I've got to study economics, I've got to study maths to get into finance. But I actually was going to sort of make that one of my points to say to everyone that you don't have to study those degrees to land up in the finance world. And from my geography degree, I then applied to Gain in the summer internship program, which was fantastic. I was very lucky that I landed an 8-week internship with Lancaster Investment Management, who are a sort of small boutique hedge fund, the summer I'd left university. And that kind of set me up really nicely to kind of have a solid chunk where I actually wasn't on the investment side for this internship, which was a sort of new thing that I think Lancaster had done. They just at the time didn't feel like they needed another person on the research team, but we got on really well. And they were like, we want to have someone more sort of client facing, front of house, in a sort of business development role. And they were like, would you want to come do that as your internship? And jumped to the opportunity. It was fantastic. I kind of got experience to sort of meet with clients, how they were prospecting, how they were sort of building their business. And off the back of that, I then was introduced to Brown Advisory, which is where I currently work. And I applied for the job in the institutional marketing team, sort of at the same time I was doing the internship, which is obviously always interesting when you're interviewing at one place, but with another company. I was very fortunate to get the job at Brown, which has just led to a fantastic 2 years. I think I was sort of at the time, I was sort of thinking, do I want to go to a bigger firm or do I want to go sort of try and go with a small hedge fund? And actually deciding to go with Brown's been fantastic because they are a sort of large business, but unknown. And I was talking with our head of the international business, Logie, before doing this. And he said he likes the phrase, we're the biggest firm that no one's ever heard of, which I think sets it up well in the sense that we've got a sort of global presence, but we've been in London for coming up since 2008, and the growth has been really great. And the people are fantastic. And that was kind of the first thing I realized when I went to the interviews was meeting all the different people, everyone, the culture and the sort of human element of the finance world was really important. They conveyed this great story about Brown and the growth and how we've got this US heritage, but we're trying to expand the international presence and how I could be a part of that. And so jumped in feet first into the international marketing team and was there for about 1.5 years. And then the opportunity to move to sales came around January this year. It was sort of an opportunity I couldn't pass up. I've always sort of seen myself as being client facing and kind of in the sort of, pitch selling aspect, which I like. And anyway, so then now I've moved into the sales team on the international institutional business, which I know there's quite a lot of words in that, and that's typical of the finance jargon, but think about it more as an asset management side of the business. And we have sort of two sides. We have the asset management, which is where I sit, and we also have a wealth management side of the business. So those are the kind of two parts. And when I mean the asset management side, we are sort of selling single equity strategies, if that's US equities, if that's global equities and global fixed income. And we are trying to get investors like UK wealth managers, pension schemes, consultants, family offices, all to invest with us and put their money in our strategies. So that's kind of how I've sort of landed in where I am. I've been 2 years in August. So yeah, just coming up to my 2-year anniversary. And yeah, it's been fantastic.
Amazing. Wow. Just taking a step back, how does a young woman who's studying geography find out about Gain and then say, actually, hold on, I want to do that instead of doing geography?
Yeah. Well, actually, it was through a friend of mine who was at university in the year ahead who did the GAIN internship and was doing a couple of these webinars. And I actually saw her doing it on Instagram. And I thought that's a really interesting organization that I hadn't heard much about. And I'd done previous work experience in sort of finance, private equity companies, and also in property. So those were kind of the two areas that I was thinking about sort of as I was going into my sort of final year and thinking about jobs. So when GAIN kind of came into the picture, I was like, this is a great organization because one, it promotes women into asset management, but also it's a really great process of you basically do a job application, but then you get put into this pool of all the different firms that they work with. So it was a great way to get sort of exposure to interviews at all their partnering large asset managements, which are all fantastic. So it was, yeah, I felt and I've been a big advocate of telling anyone that I can about GAIN and that they should apply to the internship program because it's
Right, that's wonderful to hear. So you've been there for 2 years now. Those 2 years, tell me about kind of your perception of what you thought the role was and what it really is today that you're doing, and then over those 2 years, kind of how you think it's evolved and changed, particularly against sort of, a much more volatile world, much more volatile market.
Yeah, for sure. I think the perception of when you go into finance, you go into sales, it's sort of that Wolf of Wall Street-esque. It's, it's cold calling, it's the loud, sort of very male dominated. And actually, I think the sort of hard sale isn't necessarily what I found out that it is. And I think that's been a really interesting learning curve, is that it's more about the long-term relationship building, and it does take a long time. It's not the sort of, you're not going to call someone up, they're not going to invest their money overnight. It's normally a sort of, if it's not 1, 2, 3, or 5 years, these relationships that I'm working with my sales directors on, like they've been talking to these people for such a long time. And I think the other thing that has changed, but also thing I've realize it's much more about the sort of service aspect and servicing the clients, because instead of just being like this hard pushy sale, because it's a very competitive marketplace, a lot of people are doing the same thing, and also there's a lot of information out there, people can huge databases, but actually if you're able to give a great service to the client or your prospect that you're talking to and talk about build their trust, I think that's the sort of key thing that I think is really important in the role. Obviously, it then comes under the bracket of sales, and as with marketing, from that side of things, it's about building the trust with the client and understanding what they want and really listening. And it's less about sort of talking, and actually listening to them is the kind of thing that has been the difference, which I think people naturally think sales is all about just on the phone, pitching really hard, which obviously there's aspects to that. But I think, building the trust and listening to the client is really key.
Do you think this has just made you think much more long term about everything?
I think it has. I think you can't rush anything. And I think that's the kind of thing that I've learned, is things take a long time. And I think the things I've been exposed to is always changing. And I think that's something that I was going to get across, is that working in finance, you're always at the forefront of a lot of different things, but it's always moving. Like your day to day is very much not the same as the one yesterday, because you're dealing with different client requests. Your markets have changed. You're opening an office in a different area. Like, it's really exciting to be part of a business and an industry which is always changing. And you've got to keep on your toes. And if you're not necessarily built like that, then I think you can struggle a bit. But I think it's exciting and to be in a fast-paced environment, which is something that both sales and marketing.
It's great. I mean, I think that's absolutely spot on. So when you think about the dynamic environment that you're working in, the world that we're living in, and kind of your role, what sort of skills have you had to learn that you didn't perhaps have before?
Yeah, for sure. I think from the sort of typical skills, I think the one thing I think is very key is organization. And I think from both marketing, sales, and I think in any job, we're working with a lot of different stakeholders, both internally and externally, lots of different deadlines. You've got data coming from all different sources. You've got commentary coming from PMs. You've got different things in compliance. And if you're not organized, then you're going to let things slip. And I think that's something that is very key in my world of work, is being really organized. I also think communication is really key. And if you're able to communicate what you need from someone, but also understand what they are wanting as well, and making sure that conversation is really watertight, that it means that everything is just a better outcome. So I'd say communication, I'd say organization. I'd also say Obviously, there's the negotiation side of sales that people always think, but you've obviously got to be, I think you've got to be proactive. And I think you've got to be someone that's like, what can I do next? Or how can I be helpful for that person? And I think taking a step back from all of that, I think the thing I've learned coming into Brown and this business is that it's really important to have a really strong internal network, because when you're working, say, in the sales team, there's so many other functions that all work with each other to then lead to that end product, which is, you've got compliance, you've got operations, you've got client service, you've got marketing, you've got events, and all these different things. It's really important that all of those work really well and then you have good relationships with them. So that's something that I think is definitely a really important thing. Anyone going into a workplace is really make connections across departments, and don't be afraid just to ask people for a coffee.
That is just so spot on. I think you're absolutely right. It's one of the amazing functions where you have to understand every aspect of the business, right? So
yeah,
I think you're in a unique position. So tell us about a typical day for you. You get up in the morning, go to work. How many days a week are you in the office? And then kind of what you do on a day-to-day basis, really.
Sure. So we are in the office 5 days a week, which I think is a great thing when you're early in your career, because you're around people and you're talking, you're learning. If you're in the kitchen, you overhear someone senior talking about something that you then get pulled into a meeting, which I do think the work from home has its benefits, but also I think there's some aspects that get lost in that. But from a day-to-day, I'm up. I do like to do some exercise, which I think is really important, and something that there's a big push on at work is sort of be fitness and like mentally fit, because it's a busy day, but also you've got to make time to do things for yourself. So yeah, we'll do normally some exercise, and then every day, I know this is probably going to sound a bit cliche, but the world of sales is quite, every day is slightly different, and things will crop up that you weren't even expecting to be on your day that will just arise that you need to sort out. But there's also certain things that are always the same. Like we have a weekly team meeting for the institutional business, sales team and marketing and client service operations, all on a Monday. It's the sort of first big meeting of the week. And it's a great way to kind of hear like what's in the pipeline, if we've had any big wins, what are the road shows, what's going on from like a content perspective that then the sales team can use. And if there's been updates for, say, sustainable investing, there's a lot of regulation change. So that's a great way that the team comes together on Monday, and then everyone like sort of starts the week off from that. We then have a sort of weekly office meeting on a Tuesday, which is led by Logie, which is the whole office comes together. There's different opportunities for people to share what they're doing in their department. We also do something called the stock pitch, which is if you are a sort of an intern at Brown or younger in your career, you'll get asked to do a pitch on a stock that we hold in one of the strategies. So that's a great way to, one, get like visibility to everyone in the London office, but also because we're an investment house at the end of the day, there's this big emphasis that you want to still have some investment knowledge and understand that. So I had my first one back in April, which was great. I did it on booking.com, and it was just really interesting to kind of talk to the investment team, the analysts, and you kind of pitch the stock for 5 minutes, and if you'd buy, sell, hold it, which is great. And then we also have like something called the morning meeting, because we're a US firm. Every single day we have a company-wide 25-minute meeting where they'll talk, a fund manager will talk about what's on his mind that quarter, someone from a different department, if they've got it's an update, and it's a really interesting conversation. And so that, again, pulls everyone together, and then everyone is just obviously so busy across time zones, offices, and then different meetings. So yeah, it's always different, but it's always a busy week. You get to Friday and you're like, okay, need the weekend, but in a good way.
So obviously done the degree in geography, moved into finance. How did you sort of learn about financial sort of terminology and what the different aspects of finance are, and really sort of really understand what your colleagues at the morning meetings, what's going on? How did you learn all that?
For sure, I think that was Yeah. I think, I definitely have still got a lot more to learn. I think that's something that I learned when I first arrived, is there's just so much to learn, in the sense of, not that it's a daunting thing, but you arrive and it's sort of, not that they're speaking another language, but it is that sort of thing. There's a lot of words flying around, and it's sort of, you don't let it sort of scare you straight away, because you do, I think also just by osmosis of being in the office, like even talking now versus 2 years ago, you just pick up things that you don't even realize that you're more confident about. But I also think that there is some great training that you can do. I've started my exams, and that's just a great way of like, it just builds your confidence, because you sort of think you'll leave work, and a lot of people now do exams, and it's just that thing of it gives you the confidence to then do understand that. And then if you're in a meeting, you've just actually got a bit of, I don't know, like something material that you know that you have got it, that stamp of approval. But also, I think the culture at Brown's been fantastic in the sense of we sort of have this flat structure. And if you ever have a question, if you want to ask someone for a coffee, reach out to that person. And the amount I've learned from that, and also just, you know, if you bump into someone and you really enjoyed what they were talking about in the morning meeting, catching up with them after, everyone is very generous with their time and wanting to help others. And it's a really great ethos, that. And I think that's something that I didn't know before arriving, but it's something that I found here, that everyone is on this sort of team aspect. It's in their interest also to make you understand it, because then you'll do a better job, kind of thing. I think going into this, you've just got to be open and willing to learn. I think that's the kind of key thing. And you're going to get things wrong 100%. And I know that was maybe one of your next questions, sort of how do you deal with sort of setback and rejection? But you're never going to be perfect. And I'm someone that I hate getting things wrong, but you do get things wrong. It's just how you learn from that. And if it's from a business level or a personal level, just sort of taking a step back and going, what was good, but what could I do better? So then the next time it's better in that sense. So yeah, I think, and also in sales, naturally, you're going to have rejection. That's just part and part of the job. You can't win every single pitch, and you can't win every single client. But actually, someone gave me a good piece of advice. If you don't win something, just don't necessarily write it off. Keep a good relationship, because you never know, in 2-3 years' time, their outlook could have changed, and suddenly they're back in the picture again. So it's another piece. I think, you know, you've got to just look longer term, not just in the initial, say, short-term rejection.
So true. So before we talk about rejection and keeping yourself motivated, how do you sort of think people in your role should and do engage with clients and prospects? And how do you balance, to add to that, how do you balance the Brown sort of culture and branding with your own personality, and sort of getting that right balance when you're speaking to clients and prospects?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think when it comes to, I think you've got to believe what you're talking about in that sense. And I think from my own personal experience at Brown, I think the people and the leadership, if you respect and sort of look up to them, it kind of filters down, and you want to do a good job, and you buy into the brand. And because we're a global firm, we've got a lot of our sort of offices are in the US. There's a big cultural push to always get out to the US and meet those colleagues that you're working with, not just over Zoom. So again, you sort of understand that we're all part of this bigger business, not just here in London, but, you know, there's 850 colleagues over the globe for Brown, and trying to make as many relationships with them, which is great. And then when it comes to talking to the client, you know, you understand why everyone's working so hard, because you sort of understand, you know, you go to our headquarters in Baltimore, and I went for the first time last year, and I left just being like, I'm so motivated to do the best job I can, because I see what's happening in the US, which is so exciting, and, you know, what's happening in Singapore and Japan. Yeah. And then when it comes to talking to the client, I think you've just got to be listen to them. I think that's a really key thing, is not just straight away start talking, but also when I'm talking about the story, I think our story particularly is really interesting. And the fact that we're still privately owned, we're independent in the finance industry at the moment, that's something that, you know, we're seeing a lot of people getting bought out by, you know, mergers happening. And the fact that we're still independent, I think that's kind of one of our key USPs. I always try and refer back to that, and like our sort of history is really interesting. So yeah, I think you've got to believe in what you're selling, because if you don't, then people will see cracks in it. And I think as the client and the prospect would see through that as well.
100%. So how do you deal with those tough times, with rejection and keeping motivated, and really saying, is it me? Is it them? Or what am I doing? Or, you know, how do you think about that? Especially someone so young, because you have to build up a lot of resilience.
For sure. I think, yeah, I'm definitely still working on that. I don't think, you know, early on in my career, I think I would probably link it back to sort of sport. I think I love sport, and I think sport links very closely to finance, and also just job in general. And in sport, you face rejection, obviously, when you lose, but obviously you get the taste of when you win. And I think that's kind of set me up that, one, it's hard work. You know, you've got to work hard. You can't just expect to, win everything without putting hard work in. And even when you put the hard work in, you can still lose. So I think that I translate into work in the sort of sales environment and being at Brown, that if you put in hard work, even if you don't necessarily get the outcome you want, I think you still would have gained some things in that process that you can then move to the next one. So I think rejection and failure is a tricky one, but I do think we're all going to experience it. And I don't think anyone is expecting it to be 100% right the whole time. So I think that's the thing I've learned, is that, when you do have failure, people in the firm are kind of expecting you to fail. And if you don't fail, you're not learning in that sense. Just making sure that when you do fail, just think, okay, what were the key things, and were there things that I could have done better or could have controlled and can work on?
So spot on. So when you think about your role, the world we're in, and you've spoken a lot about relationships, do you think sort of technology, AI, digitization is going to change that? And how do you think it will personally affect you? Would you succumb to those changes, or will you just carry on doing things your way? How do you think about it?
Yeah, AI is the buzzword of the moment, and I think it's really important to talk about it. I think from a human perspective, there's pros of it and there's cons of it. I think from my role, there's definitely things that AI can do that can really enhance and help and make my work more effective. So, for example, we have integrated thing called BChat, which is like our Brown advisory version of ChatGPT, which is sort of its own sort of safe thing. Client information can't be sort of is protected in that sense. But what it means is that if I've written an email, I can put it through that and just say proofread or highlight any things that don't make sense. So it's just making sure that then my communication is better in that sense. The one thing I'm conscious of, and I think we've spoken about internally, is that to not let it write the content for you, because that's when you lose the human voice aspect and you run the risk of it just not being authentic. But if you're using it to kind of improve something you've already done, I find I'm using that quite a lot, and it's actually been really effective on that sense of just, again, making sure that your email is watertight. There's no grammar, there's no spelling mistakes. It's just little things like that I think have been really helpful. And I think it's definitely going to be something that people are going to use. But also I think at the end of the day, a computer is never going to be able to do what a face-to-face conversation is going to do. So in that sense, I feel like hopefully my role is going to still be there, but you definitely can use it in a useful way to make things more effective. And also, if you're trying to read through a massive bit of commentary, you could use the AI to, help you summarize or bring out the sort of key points that you can then work off and like help, or they can sort of refresh you're trying to do a pitch practice or write up a meeting. It can then like just make things a bit neater. So that's how I've been using it at the moment. I'm sure there's many other ways that people are using that is really effective. But from our side, I think using it, but also not replacing the human voice aspect is kind of the key thing.
It's great getting the balance right. I think you're spot on. So if we sort of move to career advice here, as you know, again, we work with young women who are aspiring to have careers in finance. What's the best career advice you've ever received, and what advice would you offer those starting out in the industry?
Yeah. Again, I'm not saying that I'm any knowledgeful whiz. I'm very much early in my career, but from a piece of advice that I received that I think is really something that I've used in my working career is I was told you want to be a sponge, and especially when you're early in your career, you want to just be in a position where you're able to be absorbing as much information as possible and learning from so many different things. And if you're ever in a position where you're not learning and you're not taking on new information, that's when you need to think, okay, should I be doing something different? Should I be moving roles? Because if you get stuck, you're not learning. Whereas to therefore be a sponge for as much as you can in your early career. And then when you get to the point where you can make those decisions of like, okay, what do I actually want, or where am I better suited? You've got a really strong track record of different things that you've learned. And it's not necessarily meaning that your first job is going to be the job you have forever, but also just making sure you're always in a position where you're learning something. As soon as you're not learning, that's when I think you can just sort of plateau a bit. So that would be, I would then feed that advice on to the listeners to this, and anyone sort of looking to get into the world of work and world of finances, just always try and learn and be a sponge in that sense. And also get involved. I think that's something that I'm naturally that way as a person, but just try and say yes to as much as you can, because especially when you're trying to build out your sort of internal network at a firm, putting your hand up for things that are a bit out of your comfort zone, you never know what it's going to lead to. For example, last night I put my hand up to play in the cricket match. I've never played cricket before. It was a completely new experience, slightly terrifying, but actually the relationships that's now built with my new team, it's just things like that. If you just say no or don't put your hand up for something, you're not going to grow and you're not going to improve as a person. So stuff like that, I think just get involved with as much as you can, both internally and externally, is really important for people young in their career.
I think that's a sage advice. It's really, really good advice. How do you think about networking in your role, trying to build out your group of people that you can speak to and learn from, and then sort of beyond that in the industry and even prospects? How do you do that if you're new and you're still learning? What are the skills that or the tools that you use to do that?
Well, networking is pretty key, I'd say, especially from a sales perspective, but also just, I kind of think of it in two ways. I think of your internal network, so your network within a firm and how you can grow that. And because I think that's really important. And there's been a big sort of emphasis on that within Brown. And, I launched this initiative called Coffee on the Move, which I run with a colleague of mine. And we basically pair the whole London office up every 2 months with a random person. So it could be any level of seniority, and you go for a coffee and a catch up. So it's basically like you get access to going for a meeting with someone that you would never really go for a meeting with. They're not in your direct team. And everyone's really enjoyed that, because it kind of just means that you've got a chance to just go for and hear what they're doing in their business and stuff like that. So that's been a really great thing that I've really enjoyed doing. And I know that, and we get some great photos going around of the whole office, which is good. And then from a sort of next gen perspective, I think we've done a big push at the moment to try and, really, like I was saying earlier about the different departments, is making sure that the younger people in all these different departments within Brown have a really good relationship, because in 5-10 years time, we hopefully will be the sort of senior people in the teams. And if you've got a good relationship with them, it's really important from like a business perspective. And then externally, I think things like Gain are fantastic for building your external network and getting involved in that, because the people like yourself, Rahul, and all the other people involved in Gain are, one, super knowledgeable and really so helpful and want to help people. And they all have great networks. And I think that they're getting involved with those kind of things and their events and the mentorship programs and stuff like that is a great way just to kind of grow your own personal brand, which I think is this sort of weird thing was, I know people are on LinkedIn and promoting themselves, but you do have to do a bit of it. And I know sometimes, like, I don't necessarily like it that much, sort of shouting about myself, but sometimes you've just got to, it's like building your personal brand, and you can do it in different ways. You can be more, loud about it, or you can be more, quiet about it, but there's no right or wrong. And then I think just, again, going to as much things that you can, like, there's a lot of industry events that are going on around, all the different marketing, sales, investment, consultants, and just trying to go to those. And don't try and meet a million different people, but if you can leave the event, I always think if I've left the event with like one or two people that I feel like, okay, I feel like that's a really good connection that I can, go for a coffee with or add them on LinkedIn, then I think that's a good thing. Don't try and 25 new contacts in an event, because it's just not that genuine. And also, again, don't rush it. Like, you're not going to grow your network within a year. People like yourself, you're still meeting new people, and you're always, like, throughout your career, going to be meeting lots of different people and moving to different locations, maybe.
Yeah, so true, so true. When you look back, I mean, I know it's only been a few years. What have you learned from working in this industry, and how has it changed you as a person? Is there anything you've taken from your work that you sort of included in your life, or how you operate day to day with your friends, your family?
I definitely feel like I've learned more about sort of my personal finances as well, which is something that I didn't necessarily realize until I was sort of talking to friends who weren't necessarily in the finance industry. But I think I take for granted that I'm sort of exposed to investments and talking about investments on a day-to-day basis, which I was sort of talking about the Magnificent Seven, which I don't know if people on this podcast will know, but it's the sort of, the tech stocks that's been huge for the last year. And I said this to a friend and they had no idea what it was, not in a bad way, but then it's sort of understanding, being exposed to that is something that I've taken for granted, which has meant, I know what an ISA is, and sort of personal finances is something that I definitely want to, like, an education around it is something I want to do more with. And like, from, if that's educating women and their personal finance, I think there's a big push about that at the moment. And I want to get more involved in that because I think it's really important to have a bit of knowledge about, the money that we're earning from all these jobs, making sure that we're making the most of it. So that's something that I have definitely learned from being in this industry, which I definitely don't take for granted. And I think from a personal thing, I think it's shown hard work, and it's not easy. There's definitely days where I think, oh, do I want to be doing this? But I think if the wins outweigh the bad days, then it's right. And also, I think it's not for everyone, and I think that's so fine. Some people don't want to be in the finance industry, but also, again, linking back to what I said earlier, I just do think there are a lot of other jobs within a finance company that aren't necessarily finance based. And I think there's a lot of, events, for example, there's some amazing events that we do. You don't necessarily have to love finance, or the same with compliance or different things. So I think that's the other thing to take away from this, is that when you apply to a finance company, don't just there's lots of different functions within the business. If it's from a growth perspective, if it's from strategy, marketing, content, brand. So yeah, that's hopefully a useful bit of information.
No, totally. So the last part, let's think about advice. What advice would you give to a younger Georgina today, reflecting on what you've sort of seen the last few years? And what advice would you give to our GAIN interns?
I would say to myself, don't stress, because I'm naturally a bit of a stressor and a perfectionist, and don't waste time stressing, because if you just get your head down and have confidence in yourself, but not in a sort of cocky way, just that you are a good person, you work hard, and things should be okay. Obviously there's bumps in the road. I think for the GAIN people listening to this, what I would say is key, and something that I've seen from being involved with the sort of hiring of interns in the last couple of years, is be proactive. And when you're at uni, use those uni summers, which are big chunks of time, to do some volunteering, get some work experience, try and get an internship, and just start building out your CV, because sadly, the job market is very competitive and there are so many people applying for all these jobs. And if you can show that you've done something different, you've done something thoughtful or genuine to yourself, I think is a really useful thing, rather than just slightly panicking in the fourth year that I need to get an internship. I think is very useful, and also something that you can use and talk about in an interview is really important. So from that perspective, I'd say start building out your CV from a young age, which will in turn, starting to build your network. Again, just always speaking to people and just asking questions. Asking questions is key.
Georgina, this has been amazing. Having done this podcast with you, I would describe you as a wise soul and a young woman. I think you've got an amazing career ahead of you. Thank you so much for doing this for us today. To everyone who's listening, please do reach out to us, gainuk.org. We're here to help you, and particularly those young women who want to build careers in finance. Thank you so much.